So Rob,
Yep.
welcome. Beers with Bill. Thank you for agreeing to join us. I take it tonight we're going to start with Midnight Bike Club.
That is the plan. That is the plan.
Who designed the logo for you on that, or the label for that?
So the label from that one was actually, I kind of came up with the idea, and I pretty much just texted my graphic designer and was like, here's what I'm thinking. I want this bear biking through space with a cape on. And he kind of went with it. We went through a few designs, and really in the end, the labels and all the write-ups are just like whatever is rolling through my head at any given point. The write-up on it is actually kind of a throwback to my days at Trent University. Dionysus was a big festival, kind of just a drinking festival at Trent for a while there, and we used to throw keg parties in the woods and dress up in weird costumes and bike around, and I mean, just be 21-year-old kind of morons, but good times nonetheless. But that's pretty much where that whole label idea and the actual name Midnight Bike Club was a group of us that would get together mostly with 40s of malt liquor and meet at Wednesday nights at midnight and just go biking around drinking in the middle of the night. So it's it's just a throwback.
Absolutely love it.
And I have no idea what made me think of it, but I actually somewhere about a month and a half ago, right before we released it, obviously I was like, this is what I'm thinking and this is what I want to do. I've been biking a lot this summer and enjoying stopping in Victoria Park, having a beer, as you do. And it kind of flew out of that.
Okay. So this is a lighter alcohol content pale ale.
Yeah.
Which is the style that you enjoy doing.
Yeah, my preference when it comes to hoppy beers is definitely on the session side of things. I enjoy 4 to 5.5% or even lower than that, but still trying to maintain a hop presence and trying to sort of play around with the IPA level of hop, but still making it something that I can drink 4 of them and not be falling over. Yeah, I think big IPAs, 7%, the double IPAs plus are great beers, but not my preference. And a lot of this also came out of just our brew system in general. We have a very small system, so making lower ABV beers, it is better suited for how we brew in general and just how I set everything up, all of our equipment.
How would you describe this one, flavor-wise?
Flavor-wise, so this one, the big thing with this is a blend of hops that was just released by BSG Canada. So they sell us malt, but they also sell hops and other brewing ingredients, etc. And they were, Shelly, who is the sales rep for BSG in this area, was promoting this, and I said, hey, I really like these hops. It's like this kind of all the things in hoppy North American hops that I'm looking for kind of bundled into one package. There's a light citrus note, you can get tropical, like exactly what you want in your IPAs, all in one, and I don't have to do blends of all these different, okay, pick some Citra, pick some Mosaic, take some Amarillo, Idaho 7, you name it. it kind of encompasses all of those flavors within itself. I think there's kind of a very, for my brewery in particular, benefit to only having to open one package of hops. So I'll put 5 kilos of hops into this one brew, but instead of having to open 3 different bags of it, I can just open the one, dump it all in, and I use one fresh bag. And that is really important when it comes into ingredient storage and freshness and how that flavor comes through in the beer. So, and I really have been disappointed in the past with blends that have been out. I just didn't really like the way they worked as a solo. But this one from BSG has been great. Main problem is they were just kind of testing out the market, which I didn't realize. So I bought the first round, did the first batch, and then bought the second round, which is in the one that we released on Wednesday. And then Shelly told me she doesn't know when she'll have it back for me. So we'll see what happens. Hopefully in, September, October, she said she's going to try and get it back. But essentially enjoy this beer while you can, because it maybe a little bit before I can brew it again.
Yeah, I hear you. I agree with Jen's sentiment there. It's nice to have a lighter beer for the summer and for biking.
Oh, yeah.
This is smooth. It's dry at the back end the way I love them. It's absolutely right on a hot day. Easy drinking beer. Great IPA.
Yeah, that's the one thing. If you have drank a little bit of short finger beer, I don't really do sweet. So most of our beers are a little drier. So if you're into New England hazy big double IPAs and whatnot, they usually have a lot of residual sugar.
Yeah.
And I'm just not a huge fan of that, so I like to dry them out a little bit. I often, like, when I talk to Jeremy and Matt at Barncat and some of these other guys, sometimes their finishing gravity, so where fermentation ends and sugars are left, are where I started fermenting, where I'm like, oh, my beer is like, you started at, or you finished at 1040, I started at 1042 and I started fermentation, and that's why my beer tastes so much different from a lot of those big hazy breweries, but still using maybe not quite as aggressive a hopping regimen, but like still a fairly high hops per liter, so grams per liter that we use on everything.
Okay. As an artisanal brewer and as a business owner, anyways, COVID-19's had major impacts on your business. What has changed the most for you in the last 5 months?
So for one thing, the beer that you're, hopefully some of you are drinking in can right now, we were forced to, for one, not forced, but ideally for just keeping the business running, making pale ales on a regular basis. So we release a pale ale about once a week at this time, sometimes every other week. And that kind of keeps short finger rolling and people buying beer regularly, just getting that fresh pale ale versus the mixed ferments. But also the canning machine, that's been a bit of a journey, but really became a big focus during COVID, because all of a sudden packaged was what you had to do. And before that, I was really relying on people coming by the brewery, having pints, hanging out. It's not so much of a thing anymore. People come by because the patio's open and they might have a beer or two, but it's very limited. It's a very different type of hangout now. And we're not doing growler fills. So yeah, transitioning to packaged, especially on a small scale, has been hard, time consuming, and a lot of learning. And as you would you would expect. Canning machines usually cost $100,000 American or more, and I did not spend that on my canning machine. That's for sure.
No, I can understand that.
Yeah.
You got your real taste of brewing under the guidance of Mike Lackey at Great Lakes Brewing. What changed for you while you were working for him at Great Lakes?
So working with Mike at Great Lakes, and what my role at Great Lakes was kind of interesting, because technically I was never a brewer at Great Lakes when I was there, and I just took an interest in our pilot system. And through this, because I was so avid and in on weekends brewing and using it, I ended up becoming really good friends with Mike Lackey. And through that, as I mentioned to Bill the other day, Mike is not exactly an open book when it comes to trying to learn things from him. And so it took a while to really break in and get him comfortable and talking to me about his process and what was going on. And it was just more of a conversation, more so than learning, like, hey, we're doing this. It was much more fluid, I guess. And really it was just because I wanted to brew small scale. We ended up hanging out in his backyard. I was in a homebrew club with Mike, and just Sundays and like long weekend Mondays, we'd be in his backyard drinking beer and making beer. And that's pretty much how I learned, and how I kind of got a passion for the small scale brewing and what I do now.
So it would be safe to say that it was working with him that really developed your drive to have your own brewery, microbrew.
I think that was already there. He just made it. He gave me some of the tools I needed to be more comfortable to move that way.
Okay. So he was more instrumental in solidifying the drive to get there.
And I mean, he probably wouldn't like me saying it, but like, he is the closest thing to a brewing mentor that I have. And he would probably laugh at that, but I mean, that's the reality of it. In the end, we're friends, but he really did show me the ropes on how to do it.
That's good. Derek's got an interesting question for you. Are you brewing more or less in volume?
Brewing more.
Yeah.
Probably not quite double, but definitely brewing more. And a lot of it is keeping up with the pale ales on that weekly basis. And I've said, I think I've gone on record a few times saying I hate making IPAs and hoppy beers and whatnot. And you know what? They're kind of a pain in the ass to brew. Like, it's a lot more cleanup. Like, if I brew Lando, I get to use leaf hops, and leaf hops are a delight. They're so easy to clean out of your kettles, and like, when you whirlpool and and then cleaning the fermenters after dry hopping, it's a pain in the ass. So I'm not as happy about that, but it's kind of I'm happy to have the pale ales going through, and the response that people have on them have been good too. And to be honest, it's exactly what I want to drink during the summer anyways.
Yeah. I hear you. I've been there. I know how much work there is in cleaning up when you're finished.
Yeah.
Yeah. That idea, sexy idea, how great it is to own a brewery, ignores the fact that there's a tremendous amount of work.
Yeah, real sexy. Everybody loves being covered at hops at 1 a.m.
That's true. You've come a long way since your days, as you referred to, having the keg parties in the bush at Trent University. If you could go back in time from today, what single piece of advice would you give your younger self?
So the main thing I would do is tell myself more science, molecular biology, get in on that and get a base in the lab. I think it would be awesome to have that experience at this point. And something that when I was at Trent, honestly, we paid rent with keg parties. I was in business administration. It was a ton of fun, but I didn't take school super seriously. I also don't enjoy school personally. It's not my preferred way to learn, and it's not the best way that I learn. I'm much more of a hands-on person, so university was never really the right fit for me and how I learn things. I didn't know that when I was 18, 19. So here we are, and I kind of laugh like, yeah, I run my own business, but I think I learned more by throwing keg parties and how to make money and pay rent than I did from going to my accounting and economics classes. So really, I think, yeah, get in on the sciences. That would have been the main thing to do.
Garrick had another question. He wanted to know if the homebrew side of the business has picked up with people being homebound in COVID.
Yeah, especially that first kick in there. Um, the shop went crazy, especially when like Ford kind of did a couple of those weird announcements where it's like, we're going to shut everything down. Tomorrow we'll tell you the list. And then everybody, like that night, it was just like explosion on the shop. And people were just like, oh, they're going to shut everything down and just buying everything. And at that point, my shop manager had been away the previous week in Vermont, and he got back that Friday. So the shop exploded, and he had to quarantine for 2 weeks. And I hadn't been in the shop in like months. In terms of like, I don't operate the shop anymore with the brewery that is already more than enough for me to do. So we had this 2 week scramble where me and Stu were in there trying to figure out where everything was again, how to like make sure we weren't missing orders, and it was just madness. But it started to even out at this point. But for sure, at the beginning of COVID, a lot of new people, a lot of people. We were like, I haven't seen you order anything in two years. Apparently, all of a sudden you got time, which is great. The funny thing, which Mike, who was the shop manager, that first little bit, once he got back in that like, I think it was about 6 weeks, he was just like, we sold so much crystal malt in that first period there. Like we sold more crystal malt in 6 weeks than we had in a year. And that's because all of these homebrewers who are like kind of old school, who hadn't brewed in a while, showed up, and all those Ontario IPAs with crystal malt popped up. And yeah, it was pretty funny because most homebrewers at this point are making New England IPAs, and they might throw a little honey malt in there, but crystal malt is not nearly as popular.
Wow.
But, yeah.
Wow. What a difference, eh? You worked at Horizon Beers for a while. How did that impact your brewing style?
So Horizon is a Belgian beer importer, for those of you who don't know, and they bring in Rochefort, Chimay, St. Bernardus. So really, really good Belgian beer. They also have a lot of other stuff in their portfolio, some American stuff too. But the one thing that it did teach me in beer I wanted to brew is that I hate Belgian doubles. I hate Belgian triples. I just can't get behind them. And it is like realizing the more and more I learned about Belgian beer, I was like, oh, this huge style, these Trappist breweries, and hate is a strong word, but it was like, I have no desire to brew those. I like saisons, and I don't like sweet saisons. I like slightly bitter, or I like acidic saisons. So it helped me kind of realize and figure out where to look for beers. And I mean, the last trip we had to Belgium, Kat and I went on, we did stop by. Oh, we did stay at St. Bernardus. They have a little Airbnb connected to their brewery, which is like just beautiful. But like for the most part, we did saison breweries and beer to guard breweries because I was going through this phase about a year and a half ago, I guess maybe 2 years ago, where I was really into beer to guard and wanted to figure out what that style actually was. And I still don't actually know what that style is because every brewery I went to in Belgium had a different version of it. So it's, yeah.
Okay. I missed a question from Naomi, so I'm going to have to backtrack. I want to track that Belgian a little bit more.
Yeah.
Can you give her an example of a beer that we would know that has crystal in it, crystal malt?
Okay, so trying to think, so Bone Shaker, original Bone Shaker would have crystal malt in it. Original Lone Pine, and even Lone Pine now does have some crystal malt in it for when you get into IPAs. Beyond that, you're gonna have any sort of stouts. Like you get into beer with a little more depth and malt flavor, Irish Reds, they're all gonna have crystal malt in it. But often they're not as expressive as they would be in a pale beer because the pale beer will just have your basic two-row, which is your base malt.
Okay, Rob, thank you. So I'm curious why it is that you don't like Belgian doubles and triples, or that you're not into them. Maybe don't like is not the right way to say it. You're not into them.
I went through a phase where I really did enjoy quads, and I still have bottles of quad in my cellar for sure. But it is the sweetness which
Okay.
has over time, it's just like, I don't have a sweet tooth. And that's come through more and more as I brew and figure out what I like, which is a big part of how I brew at Short Finger.
Okay. I'm ready to switch into the Lando. I don't know where everybody else is, but I'm curious. What is the backstory behind the Lando series?
Yeah, we can get into Lando. I'm not gonna chug my beer, but if does anybody have a bottle of Lando? Okay.
Yeah.
We got a couple. So what batch do we have?
Got the AC is my cold one.
AB?
AC.
AC. Okay.
We went for new NZ.
NZ. Okay.
I've got 6 of them downstairs, but AC is the one I picked for tonight.
Sweet. Excellent. Okay, so I don't know. I guess most people kind of have an idea what Lando is, but I'll just sort of do a walkthrough of that. Does that make sense there, Bill? Sort of.
That makes perfect sense. I think giving us the backstory for Lando is perfect.
Yeah. So this beer is essentially the same beer, but every time I brew it, I do something slightly different. And I'll get into that a little bit more. But the plan and what Lando was supposed to be is supposed to be a flagship for Short Finger. It never really turned into that. And that's mostly because I think general consumers having the batch versions was a little confusing for people. But it is our in-house sour saison that is barrel aged. It's pretty much always blended with fresh Lando that I brew. Most of the blends will have 3 different versions blended to make a cohesive beer that I'm happy with. And the point of it was to start a project that was very unique to Ontario. And I'm sure there's some other breweries who have similar things, but every time you drink Lando, it is the same base beer. I have, for a while when we first started, I did play around with the malt bill a little bit, but now it is completely dialed in. I don't change it at all when I brew it. It is always the same base malts, and also our house culture, which contains Saccharomyces, Brettanomyces, Pediococcus, and Lactobacillus. So it is a mixed fermentation beer. You have your basic beer yeast, the Saccharomyces, and then you have bacteria, which is the Pediococcus, and Lactobacillus, which is our souring agent, which is why it is often have quite an acidic character to it. And then Brettanomyces, which is technically a yeast, but does add in a little more funk and depth, and also dries out the beer quite a bit. So something like NZ, which Terry and Emma have, which is one of the newer releases. NZ, that batch stands for New Zealand, which we use Waiiti and Wakatu hops. And we dry hop the barrel aged version at a second use Chardonnay barrels, blended with fresh. And then I added in a little bit of our Brett Lando to add in that depth, and did a dry hop at the same rate that I dry hop our pale ales, which is roughly about 14 to 15 grams per liter, which is, again, like, I know for some people that probably doesn't mean a lot, but it's quite high. And then it's bottle conditioned. In NZ, I did use champagne yeast to condition it, but it is probably the most unique Lando and one of my least favorites. Yeah, I don't love NZ, but most people seem to like it a lot more than I do, which is usually the case. Where what Derek has there, the AC, so any batch that is denoted with an A is a neutral oak series, which means I've essentially used that barrel in the past, stripped any characteristic, whether it be a whiskey barrel, Chardonnay, you name it, and now it is just a house for the bacteria and my house culture to express. And you won't get any additional wood notes other than basic, pretty much oak, to go with it. And really important part of that is the barrel time itself and how the beer behaves in a slight presence of oxygen. Specifically, the Brettanomyces eats off that quite a bit and develops the flavor. The A series of Lando are definitely my favorite. AC actually came out a little more acidic than I had originally planned for, but I really do enjoy it. And to be clear, Terry and Emma, it's not, don't think that I don't like NZ at all. I still do like it. I found that the dry hop pulled away from the base Lando characteristic that I like to tie all the beers together. And so my worry with something like that is if somebody tried that beer, they wouldn't see it as the full picture of the project of what is Lando. Technically, and I don't know, I know there's a few people in Kitchener and Toronto who are doing this. Every time I release Lando, they buy multiple bottles of it and then put it in their cellar, so then they can start doing verticals, but like tastings of all the different batches at any given time. And I mean, really, it is a beer geek beer for all intents and purposes. It's just not your, hazy double IPA or big imperial stout. It's a mixed ferment, and the acidity is often, I like to say, balanced. I'm always trying to balance that beer and make it have an acidic profile, which is refreshing, but never puckering. And that's kind of the reason why I blend it all the time. Just trying to soften notes and make it a little more well-rounded beer, which is the beauty of any brewery that actually gets into blending. It's well worth doing.
Just wondering, is the C in AC, is that like the third batch of the A series, or?
Yeah. So as of right now, there's A, AB, and AC. One sec, I'm gonna grab my beer.
Derek, I'll put you in the corner for unmuting yourself, okay?
So the last note that I will make on the Lando series is, so what I just cracked Billy 20, which this is Billy D, which is our golden plum. And essentially we have Lando Day at our brewery every June 20th, which is our birthday. I just decided to call our birthday Lando Day because it's my favorite beer. And so I've started releasing Billy D on this day, and it is an unblended barrel-aged version, no fresh Saison, no fresh Lando added into it, and it is the most acidic version of Lando. And for that reason, I pretty much only do it once a year. I think the only other version of Billy D I released was on our opening day for our bottle shop in 2018, 2017. The years all blend together. And then the other version that I do of this beer is also called Donald Glover. And that is young Lando stainless only. And it doesn't go into barrels. Sometimes I dry hop it. Sometimes I put fruit on it. But essentially, I'm just a big geek. That's about it. Yeah.
So I've got CE. What a wonderful aroma the second I capped it.
Yeah. CE was released for Lando Day this year as well. So it is one of the more bitter versions of Lando that I did, using all Tettnang hop on it, barrel aged in 30 use red wine, I think. So fairly neutral. It was actually originally supposed to be one of the A series, but when I blended in I brewed a very bitter version of Lando fresh to try and cut some acidity and work with some more fresh hop notes in it. And CE was the blend that came out of that. And I actually very, very happy with how that one turned out, and think it will probably be one of the better seller versions of Lando, if you have any patience to sit on it.
I can see that. I'm almost regretting opening the bottle. I'll have to come up and get another couple.
I'm sure I can get you another.
Yeah. Just a couple of questions. This has been very enlightening about Lando. But Derek wants to know, and it's a question I've kind of asked myself too. How do you know when a barrel becomes neutral?
Really, you just taste it. Like, that's about it. And really, at this point, you kind of get a time frame of how long. Okay, first use was 9 months. And then second use was 14. And then my third use is in that 12-month and tasting it, and you can tell it's stripped out a lot of that wood characteristic, whether it's tequila, bourbon, whatever. But bourbon is a weird one, and so is gin actually. Gin, so we use Willowball gin barrels quite a bit for a few of our golden sours that we do, and I swear I like 4 uses in, 5 uses on some of them because they're quite well made barrels, and you cannot get that herbal whatever blend of spices that Willowbald is using in them. It just keeps on giving.
So Terry wanted to know, I'll get back to David Hussey's question, but Terry wanted to know about tequila barrels. Have you used them?
Yeah. I have a beer called Bigger Than Kiss, which I have not released for people yet. I did send some to a bar recently, but essentially it's a tequila barrel coupage that I did, and I named 4 barrels after the 4 members of Kiss. And the point was that I would take these 4 barrels and then blend them together after the fact. And so each beer that went into it was slightly different, brewed in advance to then come together. It didn't really work as I had planned. And so this was like early on in when I was sort of getting into expanding our barrel program. And to be honest, that blend, and I mentioned this on the label, which I know none of you have seen, but Peter Chris did not make the cut. He did not make it into the blend, to no one's surprise, because Peter Chris sucks. And tequila barrel is it's a weird one. I want to do it again, but not in this project. I was a little thrown off by it, so I haven't picked up any more tequila barrels at this point. But I have so I build beers off names in my head often. So I have this like Buenos Nachos beer in my head that I just keep coming back to and and I just can't get it out of my head. So, there'll be more tequila barrels. I just don't know that I'm super happy with how it works with a golden sour base. So it's building up some different stock to go into it. Probably some sort of fruited dark sour is kind of where I'm playing around with. I just haven't put all the pieces together in my head at this point. And usually sometimes beers take me forever to work out the name to finish and make it happen. And other times I just thought of a beer name this weekend, which I'm gonna try and pull off probably in the next few weeks, called Like Elvis. And it's gonna be a peanut butter, banana, bacon stout. So we'll see we'll see how this goes. And I hate those type of beers, to be honest, but I came up with his name this week and I was like, I gotta do this. And now here we are. I'm probably gonna do it.
Yes, I know you hate those type of beers because we had quite the discussion the first time we brewed a beer.
Yep.
I'm going to have you back sometime because I'd like to do a session on homebrew. I know, that's you and Kat started in that area. Mm-hmm. David wants to know if there's such a thing as homebrewing for dummies.
Yep. I mean, they got a book for that, I'm sure. There's a bunch of those dummy books, but with COVID, unfortunately, so we used to do classes at the homebrew shop once every 2 months. We kind of had it on a regular beginner's guide to homebrewing. And they were really popular. The main problem with them was they sold out so fast. And we just always had people waiting to get into the next class. And I'd say that's the that's a great way to get into homebrewing, because you sit there. I don't run the classes as much anymore because I ramble too much, and sometimes I just go on weird tangents about God knows what. So Kat kind of runs it, and she's a teacher, and one of our friends, Jamie, who's also a teacher and homebrewer, run it together, and it's a much better class that way. But essentially, you get to see the whole process, start to finish. I've already brewed the beer in advance, so you even get to bottle it that day. So it kind of walks you through everything as a home brewer you would do, and you don't have to buy any of the equipment. So at the end of the class, if you're like, that's cool, I don't want to do that. That seems like a lot of work, because you know what, brewing is a lot of work. Then you didn't have to buy the stuff. You know, you got the experience. You know what it's about. You have a much more hands-on knowledge of how to brew and what it takes to do it, and you didn't have to, other than an afternoon and drink a few beers. That's it. So that's ideal, and hopefully once COVID and the world gets somewhat back to normal, we'll be able to start doing that again. Partial mash kits are the best bet for someone who's new. So we have a few kits in our store that are just like, you do not have to do full mash. You steep some specialty grains, you do a quick boil, you chill, and you ferment. That is pretty much the easiest way to start doing it at this point. Bucket fermenter, have a stock pot, do it on your stove. The first few beers will probably be okay at best, but you'll kind of get the process down. Your third beer may suck. You probably got an infection. You didn't clean something. And then by your fifth beer, you clean it up again. Yeah. It's a process, and it's learning. It's like anything. You know, the more you do it, the better you get at it.
My great-grandfather was a chocolatier. And I have his original book. The first 4 chapters are devoted to sanitation. Same as in beer. Everything's got to be clean because you can just ruin a batch so fast. And people forget that part. So.
Yep. Cleaning is number one.
Yep. Clean is number one. And if you don't think you did it right, wash it again. Your beer mantra. Just make the best beer ever. Tell me more about that.
I mean, I don't know why I said that. That's a ridiculous thing to say. But really in the end, I guess because approaching brewing a little more like art than science is how I go about it. So for me, it's about creating something that I think could be the best beer, and I'm trying to make it the best beer for myself. And that's why I do focus on projects like Lando and like our Solera with Sawdust City, Sam there that we do, where they're projects that I can put my hands on, and it's not just the pale ales that we kick out every week, and it's just production. There's something to it, and I think the reason that I do this is really just to try and make that like perfect beer that I'm like, I did it, there it is, and then I'll be done, and then I'll do something else.
COVID-19 is eventually going to be beyond us, and we're going to go back to some kind of a new normal. What would be the next beer vacation that you take?
I think, Kat and I wanted to do Berlin and Goslar. That was our plan. So if we can ever get back to Europe, I think I'm going to take a bit of a break from Belgium. As much as I love hanging out in Brussels, I want to go back to Germany and kind of hit into traditional Berliner Weiss style in particular. We do short shorts, which is our American style Berliner Weiss, often fruited and release it through the summer. But I'm very interested in just seeing and trying to get a better scope of what this beer was supposed to be. And I mean, it'll be tough to say. Really, I'm going to pick the brain of Richard at Escarpment if I do this, to really go through, okay, what are the breweries that are still traditionally trying to do this? Because it's tough to find them. And even something like Goza style, which is now really popular, or well, has been very popular for a few years now with North American breweries, they're all kind of just acid bombs, right? And if you read there was a book recently released about Goza, and one of the main points that came up, there's a few places you can go that are doing it, but a lot of them, they all died out just through World War II, depressions, somebody died and the family didn't want to do it anymore. You know, like, that's history. And so there's not a lot of these traditional breweries that are still going, or at least there's limited. And trying to find them, because if they're a traditional brewery, they're not always as savvy on social media as you may hope. But there's some of them out there, so that's where I would go. And it'd be a historical purposes.
Of course, because you're right. The mom and pop breweries are starting to disappear.
Yeah.
And so, what to get over there and to see that firsthand would be a solid piece of history. I trolled a lot of your interviews online, coming up with ideas for questions for you. One of the most recurring things in your talks were the concept of community. From the homebrew hangout, the brewing classes that Cat hosts, the collaborations that you've done with other breweries, including with myself, to the vibe that you have in your tap room, to the relationship that you have with the working center. What drives that concept of community for you?
So, I mean, for me, I think homebrew in general, and how we started as a homebrew shop. We're just this little homebrew shop in my basement and whatnot. It was about interacting with other homebrewers and getting to know them and drink their beer and have them, like, they put in an order and then they'd share a beer with me in my backyard. And, like, it's homebrew is a community within itself, but often that community seems to have trouble finding ways to get together. That's not so much of an issue now, but originally when we moved here, there was a really active homebrew club. So homebrew hangouts was started, and this kind of came out of when I was in Toronto. I was a part of 2 homebrew clubs there, and we didn't have homebrew club meetings. We just got together and drank beer, and it was just this weird little community that got to know each other, enjoyed each other's beer, brewed beer together. And everything with the homebrew hangouts and what was going on with the homebrew shop back in the day was really built out of how much I enjoyed that and how much I thought that was a worthwhile thing that homebrewers who maybe didn't have it or had an experience would be like, oh, I can actually talk to someone about a Hefeweizen here, and it's not like, well, I hate banana beer. Like, you can actually talk about it. And if you ever went to the old shop down at 20 Hearst, which is in where Wooden Boat Food Company is, That, I mean, I kind of laugh when I think about those days because like it was this tiny little building and the till was like right under this giant heater, but then right behind me there was like 7 taps and we just like hang out and drink beer and people would bring in beer and like if you showed up there might be like 3 guys just hanging around the till cracking bottles of homebrew. And I kind of wanted to recreate that as I went into the tasting room, but obviously with licensing and whatnot, it was tough to do. You can't really do that kind of stuff. Um, and then as for the like collabs, having worked at Great Lakes for so long, they are a big collab brewery, and working for them, I really got to know a lot of other people in the community, which opened up doors as I started Short Finger of just like giving a call to Matt down at Bar Hop when he was there, which is another small brewery. Let's do a collab and do that. Work with Kyle at Half Hours because I already knew Kyle because he won one of the homebrew contests that Great Lakes was involved in and brewed Beard of Zeus when I was there. And, you know, like, it's just, yeah, it's that community and how Great Lakes fostered that. At times I kind of laugh at them because you know they do collabs with like Canada's Wonderland now, which I'm like, okay, but the base of what they were doing back then was worthwhile, especially like when Ian from Amsterdam and Mike were getting together and actually like collabing together. Maverick and Goza was one of the first Gozas made in Ontario that was actually really good. And that I saw that happening, and that's what I liked about it, and that's what made me want to build this. And the homebrew hangouts, we were trying to work with local breweries and collab with them and do education on it. It was all kind of built out of this.
I'm disappointed in Jen because she usually asks this question, but I'm going to ask it. When you're not hanging out at your own brewery, who's your favorite brewery?
Ooh,
Well, Kickoff isn't around to come and visit anymore, so you've got to have someplace else to hang out.
is that, excuse me, local? Or am I allowed to?
You can go wherever you want to go.
One of my favorite breweries for brewers who I've never actually had a conversation with because he speaks French and I don't, is Danny at Fantôme. Luckily, my wife Kat speaks French. We got to hang out with him, and that was a very interesting experience that I loved. And that brewery, they make bitter saisons, which are not my favorite. When it comes down to the beer they make, and I'm not even like, oh my god, this beer is the best. I just loved hanging out at that guy's brewery while he drinks like Coca-Cola and triple Carmelite, and everywhere he goes, because it's this like tiny little farmhouse and all the doorways are tiny, and every time you walk through a doorway he pats the top of the doorway so you don't knock your head off it, and like there's like dirt floors. And I think that was one of the first times I went to a brewery and I thought I may not be as crazy as I think I am. There are other people who are crazier who are making this work. And I think that's why I really like Danny and what was going on there. Another Belgian brewery, which is more of a time and place, but also Oberon, which is kind of on the border of Belgium and France, and their flagship beer is delightful. Again, nothing that I'm like, oh, I got to recreate this or anything, but it's just this tiny little town, and there's a river that runs right along their tasting room, and they have a little restaurant there, and it's beautiful. And if I could hang out there all the time, I probably would.
That's great. Uh, Jen does want to know locally, where would they find you hanging out?
Oh, local.
That's even a tougher one.
Counterpoint is going to be where I go the most. Yeah, yeah. Those
Counterpoint.
guys are awesome, and it's nice to have someone else. Very small. You know, we're both working on really small systems, and so I'm buddies with Craig at a verb, and but there's nothing. There's other than we both make beer, but like his production and what's going on is not relatable. We don't have the same conversations. I don't care about LCBO distribution and how many cans per minute he can get out of Kolsch when he contracts it out of a different space. And that's not knocking him in any way. It's just we don't have relatable
Yeah.
businesses in the end. It might as well be, you know, you're selling apples, I'm selling oranges.
Yep. Do you have a few more minutes? It's been an hour. I just want to get a few more minutes.
Yep.
Got a couple more questions. You've celebrated 5 years now, but the first 4 years were a pretty wild ride. Starting out in a basement and using your kitchen fridge for the yeast, to moving to that small space, to moving to 7,500 square feet of space, which is much larger than you ever anticipated. How do you feel about that? You knew I was going to ask.
I knew you were going to ask. I knew you were going to ask. You know what? I'm very conflicted about it. Being bigger than I ever wanted to be worries me. As an entrepreneur, running a business, I've got so much more overhead and things that like I just wasn't planning on having in the way I do. But also as someone who brews beer and trying to just take this mentality that I'm just gonna brew beer that I want to make or drink, and that's what I do, and hopefully people like it, and if they don't, well, that sucks, but they can drink somewhere else. It gets tougher to do, and you can see it as COVID rolls through, and I started kicking out the pale ales on a weekly basis or close to it, and making these adjustments to how the brewery operates as it gets larger. And I'm constantly in my head, just like, where's that line? Where do I want to stop it? So I recently, during COVID, bought a 7-barrel bright tank, and which is not a huge tank by any stretch of the means when you go to any other brewery. But I've decided that this is the cap point for short finger, and 7 barrels. So I can upgrade tanks around the brewery to 7 barrels. But if I go beyond that, then I have to really look at the business plan and why I'm doing it. Because I left Great Lakes because I didn't like production. I didn't want to be in a situation where I was stuck in this production model of kicking through. I wanted to do this as a creative outlet. I wanted to do it to make beer that was unique and not available readily to other people, and for people who understand that and are into that. So, I mean, success is and like, don't think that like, oh, we're just like selling beer by the bottle. No, we don't sell that much beer. But like trying to figure out where that level is constantly in the back of my mind, because yeah, 7,300 square feet. My original business plan, I'm fairly certain I said the largest the space should ever be is 2,500 square feet. And that was a long time ago.
I remember having that conversation with you
Yeah.
a long time ago.
And really, it's just my peace of mind. I think, grand scheme of things, why am I doing it?
Yeah.
I'm not doing it to get rich, believe me. I am not getting rich. we're, you know, we're keeping the lights on and making beer that I am very happy with. And so at that point, I can't complain, and I'm not complaining. It just always worries me.
It's like having a baby. It's always there 24/7.
Yeah, just trying to worry me more there, Bill. Eh?
Not at all. I'll just share you because is it common knowledge now?
Yeah. I think so.
So Kat and Rob are expecting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Kat is 5.5 months pregnant. Thank you.
Yeah. And I'm just going to share one little story about my mom with you. On her deathbed at 2:30 in the morning at the hospice, I went to visit her because I knew that might be the last time I get to see her. Do you know the only conversation we had was I was working too hard and I needed to learn to slow down. This is pre-COVID. And I'm sitting there thinking, Mom, I'm not the one dying. But you never stop being a parent. So, you know, and when you're a small entrepreneur, when you're an entrepreneur, it's your baby all the time. Rob, I want to thank you for being here. I want to thank you for being open and honest in our conversation, telling us like it is. I really appreciate that.
Thanks for having me, Bill.
Well, absolutely. I totally appreciate you and Kat and the support that you've given me. There's one final question, but before I get to one final question, next week is Camfryer Royal City. For those of you who want to order the beer, you need to do it by noon tomorrow or you won't be getting delivery. You'll have to drive to Guelph to pick it up. Just to let you know that. I have no idea who Derek's referring to, but are there any future brewing plans with everyone's favorite grumpy bartender?
Oh, I guess you never know. You never know.
We've discussed it,
right
ladies
now.
and gentlemen. We've discussed it. COVID-19 really limits when and how we're going to do it. I'm contemplating doing a Christmas collab and a birthday collab, which may only be available through the bottle shop, but we haven't got that far yet because it's a big commitment on the part of both of us to do that.
It's really hard to plan anything at this point, but collabs. So we've done a few tandem collabs through COVID, which have worked. The one being with Counterpoint, and the one we're releasing tomorrow, which is Foam Slayer, which has been like a fun way to do it, but it's at this point don't really want to be around a lot of people, so it's hard to have someone in your house.
Totally understand that. Totally understand that, Rob. If you want to stick around, Rob, I'm going to let people unmute and I'm going to stop recording.
Yep.
And this